The champagne flute nearly slipped from my hand when I heard Marcus laugh. That specific laugh, the one he reserved for his cruelest moments. I steadied myself against the marble column of the hotel ballroom, trying to become invisible among the engagement party guests while his voice carried across the crowded room. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed. Because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Can you believe she actually showed up? Marcus said, his arm draped possessively around his fiancée Veronica's shoulders. My washed-up ex-wife, probably hoping for free appetizers. The circle of his friends erupted in knowing chuckles. I watched Veronica, blonde, polished, 32 to my 41, tilt her head with practiced concern, the kind that barely concealed satisfaction. She wore a diamond engagement ring that could choke a horse. I knew exactly how much it cost because technically I'd bought it. But they didn't know that. They didn't know a lot of things. I took a measured sip of champagne, watching them through the ornate mirror behind the bar. My reflection showed a woman in a simple navy dress, minimal jewelry, hair pulled back in a practical bun. Forgettable, invisible. Exactly as I'd planned when I'd reinvented myself 3 years ago after the divorce. "Natalie!" A voice interrupted my surveillance. I turned to find my friend Jessica, one of the few people who knew why I was really here. "I can't believe you're going through with this. Are you sure?" "Positive," I murmured, my eyes tracking Marcus as he worked the room. "The documents?" Jessica slid a cream envelope from her clutch, discreet as always. "Everything you asked for, though I still think you should have let me leak this to his office last month." "No." I accepted the envelope, feeling its weight, heavy with truth. It needs to be public. It needs to be tonight. And she needs to be the one who finds it. Jessica squeezed my hand once before disappearing back into the crowd. I checked my watch. 8:47 p.m. In exactly 13 minutes, the venue coordinator would make the announcement for dinner seating. Veronica would excuse herself to the ladies' room, she always did, creature of habit, touching up makeup before any formal meal. I'd observed her routine over the past 6 weeks since the engagement announcement. 6 weeks of watching, planning, waiting. The irony was that I'd been invited legitimately. Marcus's mother Eleanor had insisted, believing in maintaining civility. She'd sent the invitation to my P.O. box, the only address Marcus knew for me anymore. The return address led to this ostentatious hotel ballroom, 200 guests, and an open bar funded by money Marcus thought he'd hidden quite cleverly. "Ladies and gentlemen," the coordinator's voice rang out right on schedule. "If you'll please begin making your way to your assigned tables, dinner. Service will commence shortly." Perfect. I watched Veronica whisper something to Marcus, watched him nod distractedly as he shook hands with what looked like a senior partner from his law firm. She moved through the crowd with the confidence of a woman who believed she'd won life's lottery, successful attorney fiancé, expensive ring, lavish party. I counted to 30, then followed her. The ladies' room was all marble and gold fixtures, the kind of ostentatious luxury Marcus had always craved. 3 stalls, none occupied except the middle one where I could hear Veronica humming softly. I positioned myself at the far sink, the envelope resting on the counter beside my clutch. The toilet flushed. Water ran. I applied lipstick slowly, deliberately as she emerged. "Oh!" Veronica startled slightly, then composed herself with a practiced smile. "Natalie, isn't it? Marcus's ex-wife?" I met her eyes in the mirror. Up close, I could see the subtle work. A little Botox, probably some filler. Nothing extreme. She was beautiful in that curated, expensive way. That's right, I said, capping my lipstick with a soft click. Congratulations on your engagement. Thank you. She moved to the next sink, pulling out her own makeup bag. It's very mature of you to come tonight. Not everyone could do that. The condescension was wrapped in silk, but it was there. I almost admired her technique. Well, I said carefully, Marcus and I were married for 11 years. That's a lot of history to just pretend didn't exist. I paused, watching her apply powder with precise strokes. Though I suppose some history is easier to forget than others. She glanced at me, something flickering in her expression. Curiosity? Suspicion? What do you mean? I opened my clutch, then paused as if suddenly remembering something. Oh, I'm so sorry. I should get back. This was lovely chatting with you, Veronica. I hope you and Marcus will be very happy. I left the envelope on the counter. I'd made it 5 steps out the door when I heard her call out. Excuse me, you forgot something? Actually, I said, not turning around. I think that's for you. Her heels clicked on marble as she followed me into the corridor. I don't understand. This has Marcus's name on it, and is this a bank statement? Now I turned, and for the first time that evening, I let my mask slip just slightly. Not exactly. It's an account summary. For the joint account your fiancé and I opened in 2019. The one he told me he closed in 2021 during our divorce settlement. Veronica's face went from confused to very still. What? The account at Cascade Financial Trust, I continued, my voice pleasant and conversational, as if discussing the weather. $7 million, give or take, accumulated over our marriage through his bonuses, my investments, various gifts. In the divorce, we agreed to split it 50-50. He swore under oath that the account had been liquidated and divided. Her fingers tightened on the envelope. That's not possible. Marcus would never. Page 3, I interrupted gently. Transaction history. You'll see regular transfers outward to what I'm sure he told you were investment accounts or retirement funds. Page 7 shows where that money actually went. The penthouse on Riverside Drive that he claimed was a rental. He owns it. The company car he drives, purchased outright last year. And that ring on your finger? I nodded toward her hand. Account number 4726, transaction dated February 14th, $47,000. Veronica had gone pale under her carefully applied makeup. She was flipping through pages now, her hands starting to shake slightly. But why, she whispered, more to herself than to me. Why would you tell me this now? Why tonight? Because 3 years ago, he told the judge I was mentally unstable, that I'd let myself go after we lost our business during the recession, that I was unemployable, unmotivated, washed up. The words came out calm, measured. No emotion. That was important. He told the court I'd contributed nothing to our marriage, that his income alone had built our life. The judge believed him. I walked away with $30,000 and a used Honda. Marcus walked away with millions he'd hidden in our joint account, then claimed didn't exist anymore. Veronica looked up from the papers, her perfect composure cracking. I need to talk to him. Of course, I said. Though you should know, that account, still joint, which means I've had access to it this whole time. Every transaction, every penny. I've been watching where my money went for 3 years. I leaned in slightly, dropping my voice. Did you know he's been paying someone named Rachel Mendoza $4,000 a month? Check page 12. I didn't wait to see her reaction. I simply turned and walked back toward the ballroom, my heels clicking a steady rhythm on the expensive tile. Behind me, I heard a sound, half gasp, half sob. The dinner seating was chaos, exactly as planned. I found my assigned table in the back, a mercy placement near the kitchen doors where the divorced ex-wife could be forgotten. I didn't mind. It gave me a perfect view of the main table where Marcus sat, oblivious, laughing at something his best man Craig was saying. I checked my watch again. 8:53 p.m. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, like this video, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. In approximately 2 minutes, assuming Veronica's shock wore off at the standard rate, she would march back into this ballroom with those papers. The question was what she'd do with them. Confront Marcus publicly? Pull him aside? Storm out entirely? The psychology was delicate. She was proud. I'd researched her thoroughly. Former Miss Oklahoma, now a successful pharmaceutical sales rep. Used to winning, used to being desired. The revelation that she was wearing a ring purchased with stolen money, that her entire relationship might be built on lies, would devastate that pride. Pride made people do interesting things. At 8:54, the ballroom doors flew open with enough force that several guests turned to look. Veronica stood there, envelope clutched in one hand, face no longer pale but flushed with anger. Her eyes locked on Marcus immediately. Here we go, I thought, taking a sip of water. She crossed the room with purpose, her stride eating up the distance between door and head table. Marcus saw her coming, his smile faltering as he registered her expression. "Baby, what?" he started. "When were you going to tell me?" Her voice wasn't quite a shout, but it carried in the suddenly quiet ballroom. Conversations died around them in ripples, heads turning. About the account? The penthouse? Rachel Mendoza? I watched Marcus's face cycle through confusion, realization, and finally land on a smooth, practiced calm. The lawyer in him taking over. "Honey, I don't know what you're talking about. Maybe we should discuss this in private." "Private?" Veronica laughed, the sound brittle and sharp. "Like you privately used your ex-wife's joint account to buy my engagement ring? Like you privately committed perjury during your divorce?" The word perjury landed like a bomb. Marcus's mother Eleanor stood from her seat, one hand pressed to her pearls. Several of the lawyers in attendance, and there were many, leaned forward with interest. "Veronica." Marcus's voice had gone cold, authoritative. The voice he used to use on me when I asked questions he didn't want to answer. "You're making a scene. You're embarrassing yourself." Wrong move, Marcus, I thought. Veronica wasn't me. She hadn't spent years being worn down, being gaslit into believing her own perceptions were wrong. "I'm embarrassing myself." She threw the envelope onto the table, papers scattering across the white tablecloth, sliding between wine glasses and centerpieces. "You committed fraud. You lied under oath. You've been stealing from your ex-wife for 3 years. "That's ridiculous." Marcus stood now, trying to take her arm. She jerked away. "These documents, wherever you got them, are clearly falsified. Someone is trying to sabotage our engagement. Probably..." His eyes scanned the room, landing on me for the first time that evening. Probably my bitter ex-wife who can't stand to see me happy. 200 faces turned toward me. I set down my water glass carefully, meeting Marcus's gaze across the ballroom. Then I smiled. Not bitter, not angry. Just knowing. "Actually," I said, my voice carrying in the shocked silence, "those documents came directly from Cascade Financial Trust. They're authentic. Veronica can verify with the account number and routing information on page 1. I'd suggest she call the bank's 24-hour line. They're very helpful. Marcus's face was doing something interesting now, a flush creeping up from his collar. You've had access to that account this whole time? Joint account, Marcus. Joint means both parties retain access. You never closed it? You just hoped I was too washed up and mentally unstable to notice. I stood, smoothing my dress. Though I have to say, I'm surprised you used it to buy an engagement ring. That seems particularly bold, even for you. This is insane, Marcus sputtered. Someone call security or security? I raised an eyebrow. For what? Showing your fiancée financial documents she has every right to see? Or are you planning to have me arrested for accessing my own bank account? Eleanor had moved to Marcus's side now, her face ashen. Marcus, what is she talking about? What joint account? It's nothing, Mother. A misunderstanding. A misunderstanding worth $7 million, I supplied helpfully. Give or take. The exact amount is on page 2, though really, half of that is mine, or it was supposed to be, before your son committed perjury and told a judge it had been liquidated. The room was utterly silent now. Even the waitstaff had frozen in place, trays suspended in air. This was better than I'd imagined. More public, more devastating, more absolutely perfect. Craig, the best man, had picked up one of the scattered pages. Marcus, this is dated last week. These transactions are current. Let me see that, snapped one of the senior partners. I recognized him, Gerald Hammond from Whitmore and Associates, where Marcus worked, where Marcus had claimed he was up for partner this year. Veronica had gone very still, her eyes fixed on Marcus. Who is Rachel Mendoza? Nobody. A client. You pay clients $4,000 a month. She picked up another page, this one showing a transaction history. Every month, for the last 18 months? Wire transfers to an account in Miami? Oh, that detail. I'd been saving it, wondering if it would come up naturally. Rachel Mendoza was nobody important, a real estate agent Marcus had hired to manage his secret penthouse. But the monthly payments looked suspicious, especially taken with no context. Perfect for sowing doubt. This is a private matter, Marcus tried again, his voice strained. Veronica, please. Let's go somewhere quiet and talk about this rationally. Rationally? Veronica's voice cracked. You want to talk rationally? You've been lying to me for how long? About what else? Is there even a promotion? Were you ever planning to pay off my student loans like you promised? Or was that just another lie to keep me happy? Marcus reached for her again. This time she didn't just pull away. She shoved him, hard enough that he stumbled backward into his chair. Don't touch me, she said. Don't ever touch me again. She turned and ran from the ballroom, one hand pressed to her mouth. The sound of her heels faded down the corridor. For a moment, nobody moved. Then Eleanor slapped Marcus across the face. The crack echoed in the silence. You stupid, stupid boy, she hissed. What have you done? I chose that moment to quietly collect my clutch and head for the exit. I'd seen enough. The rest would play out exactly as I'd calculated. The lawyers would start asking questions, Eleanor would demand answers, the engagement would implode, and Marcus's carefully constructed life would begin its inevitable collapse. But I wasn't quite done yet. In the corridor outside, I found Veronica leaning against the wall, mascara streaking down her face. She looked up when she heard my footsteps, her expression cycling from anger to confusion to something like desperation. Why? She asked. Why did you wait? Why not expose him years ago? I considered the question carefully. Because 3 years ago, I had nothing. No evidence, no credibility, no resources. He'd taken everything and convinced a judge I was crazy. If I'd fought then, I'd have lost again. I paused. But joint accounts are forever, Veronica. And bitter, washed-up ex-wives have a lot of time to plan. But why tell me? Why now? Because you deserve to know who you were marrying, I said simply. And because public humiliation is so much more effective than private revenge. Marcus cares about appearances, status, reputation. I just took all of them away in front of everyone who matters to him. Veronica stared at me, something like reluctant admiration in her eyes. You're not washed up at all, are you? No, I agreed. I'm really not. I left her there and walked out into the cool night air. My phone buzzed with a text from Jessica. Holy shit, that was incredible. Coffee tomorrow? Lunch, I typed back. I'm sleeping in. The valet brought my car around, not the used Honda from 3 years ago, but a sleek Tesla I'd purchased last year. Purchased with money from very careful investments. Made with the seed capital I'd scraped together after the divorce. Turned out I wasn't unemployable after all, just employed in ways Marcus would never have understood. As I drove away from the hotel, I could see the ballroom windows blazing with light. The party would be over now, guests awkwardly filing out, whispering about the scandal. By morning, it would be all over Marcus's social circle. By next week, Whitmore and Associates would be reviewing his position. And that joint account? I'd been tracking it for 3 years, watching every penny, gathering evidence. Tomorrow, I'd be filing a motion to reopen my divorce case, armed with documentation of Marcus's perjury. The statute of limitations on perjury in our state was 5 years. I had 2 years left, and I planned to use them. But tonight, I'd settle for driving home to my small but comfortable apartment, pouring a glass of the good wine I'd been saving, and enjoying the knowledge that Marcus was currently explaining to his mother, and possibly his soon-to-be former fiancée, exactly how he'd committed fraud. My phone rang. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity won. Hello? You bitch. Marcus's voice tight with rage. You absolute bitch. You planned this. You've been planning this for years. Yes, I said calmly. I have. I'll sue you. I'll destroy you. You'll do nothing, I interrupted. Because the moment you take legal action against me, I file my motion to reopen the divorce case. And then we go to court, and a judge sees all that documentation, and you face criminal charges for perjury. Maybe fraud, depending on how aggressive my attorney wants to be. I paused. Your choice, Marcus. Leave me alone and deal with the social consequences, or escalate and face legal ones. The line went silent for a long moment. Why? He finally asked, and for the first time, I heard something other than anger. Confusion, maybe even hurt. I know I wasn't perfect, but why do this? You called me washed up, I said softly, in front of everyone. You told a judge I was mentally unstable. You took everything I'd helped build and convinced people I'd contributed nothing. You tried to erase me, Marcus. You tried to make me disappear. I took a breath. So I disappeared. And then I came back, and I made sure everyone could see exactly who you really are. I hung up before he could respond. At a red light, I pulled up the bank app on my phone and checked the joint account one last time. $7 million accumulated over a decade of marriage. Half of it was mine by law, half of it was mine by right. Tomorrow, I'd start the legal process of claiming it. Tonight, I'd celebrate the beginning of the end. The light turned green. I accelerated smoothly, the Tesla's electric motor humming almost silently as I headed toward home. toward the life I'd been building in secret for 3 years, toward the future Marcus thought he'd taken from me. Behind me, the hotel lights faded into the distance. Somewhere in that building, a party was ending, an engagement was dissolving. A man was realizing that the quiet, defeated woman he'd divorced wasn't quite as beaten as he'd believed. I'd spent 3 years being invisible, 3 years documenting, planning, investing in myself. 3 years waiting for exactly the right moment to remind Marcus that washed-up women can still rise from the ashes, and we burn so much brighter the second time around. My apartment was dark when I arrived home, but I didn't mind. I liked the darkness lately. It felt peaceful after years of having to perform, to pretend to be smaller than I was. I kicked off my heels in the entryway and padded barefoot to the kitchen, the tile cool under my feet. The wine I'd been saving sat in the back of my small wine fridge, a 2015 Chateauneuf du Pape that I'd bought at an estate sale for almost nothing. The seller hadn't known what he had. I'd learned to recognize undervalued things during my 3 years of rebuilding, including myself. I was pouring the second glass when my phone rang again. This time, I recognized the number. Eleanor, Marcus's mother. That was interesting. "Hello, Eleanor." "Natalie." Her voice was strained, exhausted. "I owe you an apology." Of all the calls I'd expected tonight, this wasn't one of them. I carried my wine to the small balcony that overlooked the city, settling into the single chair I'd squeezed out there. "Go on," I said. "I believed him," Eleanor continued. "When you two were divorcing, when he said those things about you, I believed him. He's my son. I wanted to believe him." A pause, filled with the sound of someone trying not to cry. "I should have known better. I should have asked more questions. I'm sorry." I took a sip of wine, letting the apology settle. Eleanor had never been cruel to me during the marriage, but she'd certainly been cold during the divorce. Distant, disapproving. She'd made it clear she thought I was dragging her son through unnecessary drama. "Why are you calling me, Eleanor?" "Because I found more papers. After you left, after Veronica ran out. Marcus was in the bathroom, and I went through his jacket. I found... Oh God, Natalie. There are more accounts. More lies." My hand tightened on the wine glass. "What kind of lies?" "Investment accounts in his name only, property deeds, and a prenuptial agreement he'd had drawn up for Veronica." Her voice dropped. "It's brutal. She would have gotten nothing if they divorced. Nothing, after he promised her they'd build a life together as equals." I stood, carrying my wine to the balcony railing. The city spread out below, thousands of lights and windows, each one a story. How many of them involved lies, betrayals, people being made small by the ones who claimed to love them? "Send me photos of everything," I said. "Everything you found." "Why? You've already exposed him. You've already won." "Because Veronica deserves to know everything before she makes any decisions, and because Marcus needs to understand that actions have consequences." I paused. "And honestly, Eleanor, because I'm not done yet." There was a long silence on the other end. Then, "What else are you planning?" "I'm not sure yet," I admitted. "But I spent 3 years watching him build a life on stolen money and lies. I think I've earned the right to tear it down carefully, piece by piece." "He's talking about moving money," Eleanor said quietly. "I heard him on the phone in his car. He's trying to hide assets, shift things around before you can file anything legally." My mind started calculating immediately. If Marcus was moving money now, he'd make mistakes. Panicked people always did. And every transfer, every account change, every attempted concealment would create a new paper trail. Let him, I said. Let him think he's outsmarting me. Again. You sound different, Eleanor observed. From before. Harder. Not harder, just done pretending to be soft. I finished my wine, the last sip rich and complex on my tongue. Thank you for calling, Eleanor, and for the apology. Send those photos. I will. And Natalie, for what it's worth, I'm proud of you for surviving him. The call ended. I stood on my small balcony looking out at the city and felt something shift in my chest. Not satisfaction exactly, not quite victory, something else. Something like relief. For 3 years, I'd been focused on survival, on rebuilding, on gathering evidence and waiting for the perfect moment. I'd denied myself closure, delayed justice, held everything in while I planned. Tonight, I'd finally exhaled. But the game wasn't over. Not yet. Inside, my laptop waited on the small dining table I'd picked up from IKEA. I settled in front of it, pulling up the files I'd been compiling for 3 years. Bank statements, transaction records, screenshots of social media posts where Marcus showed off purchases he claimed to afford on his salary alone. And now, soon, Eleanor's photos of additional hidden assets. My divorce attorney, a sharp woman named Patricia Chen, who'd taken my case pro bono after hearing my story, would have a field day with this. We'd been preparing for months, waiting for the right trigger to file our motion. Tonight had provided that trigger. I drafted an email to Patricia, attaching everything, outlining the evening's events. Then I opened a new document and started cataloging exactly what I'd learned tonight. The prenup, the additional accounts, Marcus's panicked response. It was past midnight when I finally closed the laptop, my eyes burning with fatigue. But my mind was clear, focused, alive in a way it hadn't been since before my marriage fell apart. Tomorrow, the work would begin in earnest. Legal motions, court filings, depositions. Marcus would fight back. Of course he would. He'd hire expensive lawyers, try to paint me as vindictive and unstable. He'd do exactly what he did 3 years ago. But this time, I had something I didn't have before. Evidence. Mountains of it. Irrefutable, documented, time-stamped evidence of every lie he'd told. This time, I'd win. I brushed my teeth, changed into pajamas, and slipped into bed. My bedroom was small, the furniture mismatched, the view nothing special, but it was mine. Paid for with money I'd earned in a life I'd built from nothing. Marcus had tried to make me disappear. Instead, he'd forced me to become someone stronger, smarter, more capable than I'd ever been during our marriage. As I drifted toward sleep, I thought about Veronica. She'd be making decisions tonight about her future, choosing whether to forgive, to leave, to demand answers. I hoped she chose herself. Women spent too much time choosing men who didn't deserve them. My last thought before sleep claimed me was of tomorrow, of the motion Patricia would file, of the moment when Marcus would be served with papers, when he'd realize that tonight was just the beginning. He'd called me washed up at his engagement party. Tomorrow I'd show him exactly what a phoenix looks like when she rises from the ashes. The courthouse steps were slick with morning rain when I arrived at 8:45 a.m., 15 minutes before our hearing. Patricia Chen stood under the awning, briefcase in hand, looking every bit the warrior attorney she'd proven to be over the past 3 weeks. "Ready?" she asked, her dark eyes sharp with focus. "More than ready," I replied, adjusting the collar of my charcoal suit. I'd chosen it carefully, professional, confident, expensive enough to make a statement. Not the broken woman Marcus had described in our divorce 3 years ago. Inside, the courthouse hummed with the quiet chaos of the legal system. Attorneys huddled with clients, bailiffs directed traffic, and somewhere in this maze of marble and wood paneling, Marcus was preparing his defense. We'd filed our motion to reopen the divorce case exactly 17 days after his engagement party. Patricia had worked miracles, compiling 3 years of documentation into an airtight case of fraud and perjury. Bank statements, transaction records, property deeds, even social media posts where Marcus flaunted purchases he'd claimed to afford on his modest attorney salary. The evidence was damning. But evidence didn't always guarantee justice. "They're offering a settlement," Patricia said as we found seats outside courtroom 4B. "Marcus's attorney called this morning. Full restitution of your 50%, $3.5 million, plus $200,000 for emotional distress. No admission of guilt. Clean break." I watched a young couple exit the courtroom, the woman crying softly while her lawyer patted her shoulder. Another divorce finalized. Another life split in 2. "What do you think?" I asked. Patricia studied me carefully. "Financially, it's fair. You get your money back, plus compensation for 3 years of legal hell. Practically, it saves months of litigation, depositions, potential appeals." She paused. "But if you want to watch him face consequences for perjury, we go to trial. The DA has expressed interest in criminal charges if our case proves the fraud." Criminal charges. Marcus in handcuffs, being processed, potentially serving time. 3 years ago, I would have fantasized about exactly that scenario. But now, sitting in this courthouse, I felt something unexpected. Exhaustion. "He'd fight it," I said. "Drag it out for years. Spend millions on defense attorneys. Tie up my money in legal battles. Probably," Patricia agreed. "Rich men rarely go down without scorched earth tactics." "And Veronica?" I asked. "Where does she fit in all this?" Patricia's expression shifted, something like satisfaction crossing her face. "That's the interesting part. She's not with him anymore. Left him the night of the party, filed a restraining order 2 days later. Apparently, Marcus showed up at her apartment drunk, demanding she stop making him look bad." I absorbed this information slowly. Veronica had chosen herself. Good for her. "The restraining order is public record," Patricia continued, "along with her statement to police about his aggressive behavior. It's not helping his case. Judge Morrison doesn't have much patience for men who intimidate women." The courtroom doors opened, and a bailiff called out, "Brennan versus Brennan, case number 2024 DR 8843. My maiden name? I'd taken it back after the divorce, shedding his identity like an old skin. Hearing it now felt like reclaiming something precious. We entered the courtroom. All dark wood and high ceilings, the American flag flanking the judge's bench. Marcus sat at the defendant's table with his attorney, Gregory Walsh, a silver-haired man in a suit that probably cost more than my monthly rent. Marcus looked terrible. Not the polished, confident man from his engagement party, but someone hollowed out by stress. Dark circles under his eyes, suit slightly rumpled, hands fidgeting with a pen. His eyes met mine across the courtroom, and I saw something there I'd never seen before. Fear. "All rise," the bailiff announced, the Honorable Judge Diane Morrison presiding. Judge Morrison was exactly as I'd researched. Late 50s, former prosecutor, reputation for no-nonsense rulings, and zero tolerance for fraud. She settled into her chair, reviewing the file before her with the methodical focus of someone who'd seen every trick in the book. "Good morning," she said, her voice crisp and authoritative. "I've reviewed the motion to reopen, along with the extensive documentation provided by the petitioner. Mr. Walsh, I understand your client wishes to address the court?" Gregory Walsh stood, every inch the expensive attorney. Yes, Your Honor. My client wishes to present a settlement offer that we believe resolves this matter fairly and expeditiously. I'll hear it, Judge Morrison said. But first, I want to understand the facts as presented. Ms. Chen? Patricia stood, and I watched her transform into the legal force I'd come to admire. Your Honor, the facts are straightforward. During the 2021 divorce proceedings, Mr. Brennan testified under oath that the joint account at Cascade Financial Trust, containing approximately $7 million in marital assets, had been liquidated and the funds distributed equally per the separation agreement. She clicked a remote, and the screen behind her displayed a document. This is the sworn testimony from September 14th, 2021. I'll read directly from page 47. The account has been closed. All funds were withdrawn and split 50-50 as agreed. My ex-wife received her portion via wire transfer to her personal account. Patricia paused, letting the words sink in. That was a lie, Your Honor. The account was never closed. It remains active to this day, with Mr. Brennan as the sole user, making regular withdrawals and transfers. My client, Ms. Brennan, maintained legal access to the account as a joint holder and has documented every transaction over the past 3 years. Another click. Another document. This is the current account statement dated 3 days ago. Balance, $6.8 million. 3 years of withdrawals totaling approximately $200,000, all made by Mr. Brennan. None by my client. Judge Morrison leaned forward, her eyes sharp. Mr. Walsh, this seems fairly cut and dried. Your client committed perjury in a divorce proceeding and has been using marital funds for 3 years while claiming they didn't exist. Walsh stood again, his expression carefully neutral. Your Honor, my client admits to poor record-keeping and miscommunication with his attorney at the time. However, he disputes the characterization of his actions as deliberately fraudulent. He believed the account to be separate property due to the complex nature of their financial arrangements. He bought his new fiancée's engagement ring with money from that account, Patricia interrupted. A $47,000 ring, purchased 6 weeks ago. How is that poor record-keeping? The courtroom went very quiet. I watched Marcus close his eyes briefly, his jaw tight. Judge Morrison looked at Walsh. Counselor, Your Honor, my client is prepared to make full restitution. $3.5 million to Ms. Brennan, representing her 50%, plus an additional $200,000 in compensation for stealing her money and lying about it under oath? Judge Morrison's voice had gone cold. Mr. Walsh, I'm not inclined to let your client buy his way out of perjury charges. This court takes sworn testimony seriously. I felt something tighten in my chest. This was the moment. The judge was considering criminal referral. Marcus could face actual consequences beyond financial penalties. Walsh looked genuinely concerned now. Your Honor, if I may, my client has no criminal record. He's a respected attorney, a member of the bar in good standing. Who committed perjury in a court proceeding? Judge Morrison said. That undermines the entire justice system, Counselor. If attorneys can lie under oath without consequences, what message does that send? Marcus leaned over, whispering frantically to Walsh. His attorney nodded, stood again. Your Honor, my client is willing to increase the settlement offer. $3.5 million in restitution, plus $500,000 in damages, plus all legal fees incurred by Ms. Brennan over the past 3 years. Total compensation of approximately $4.2 million. In exchange, Ms. Brennan agrees not to pursue criminal charges or cooperate with any DA investigation. I felt Patricia's eyes on me. The question was implicit. What do you want? Judge Morrison addressed me directly. Ms. Brennan, this is ultimately your decision. You have the right to pursue criminal charges against your ex-husband. The evidence certainly supports it. However, I'll note that criminal cases are lengthy, expensive, and emotionally draining. And there's no guarantee of conviction, particularly with an attorney as a defendant who can afford excellent representation. She paused, letting me absorb this. The settlement offer is generous. It provides full restitution plus significant additional compensation. You'd have your money within 30 days, per the proposed agreement. What would you like to do? I stood slowly, my legs surprisingly steady. The entire courtroom was watching me. Patricia with encouraging confidence, Walsh with barely concealed anxiety, Marcus with something that might have been pleading. Your Honor, I said, my voice clear and calm. 3 years ago, I walked out of a courtroom believing I'd lost everything. My marriage, my financial security, my dignity. My ex-husband convinced a judge that I was mentally unstable, that I'd contributed nothing to our marriage, that I was, in his words, washed up. I saw Marcus flinch at those words. For 3 years, I rebuilt my life from almost nothing. I lived in a small apartment, drove a used car, worked 2 jobs to save money. I didn't do this for revenge, Your Honor. I did it for survival. And along the way, I discovered something. I'm not washed up. I'm not unstable. I'm not worthless. I'm strong enough to start over, smart enough to document fraud, and patient enough to wait for justice. I turned to look directly at Marcus. He met my eyes, and I saw tears there. Actual tears. I don't need to see my ex-husband in handcuffs, I continued. I don't need him to suffer beyond what he's already suffering. His engagement ended, his reputation is damaged, and now everyone knows the truth about who he really is. That's consequence enough. I faced Judge Morrison again. I accept the settlement offer, Your Honor. $4.2 million paid within 30 days, plus return of all items of personal property still in his possession. In exchange, I won't pursue criminal charges or cooperate with any DA investigation. I want my money, and I want to move on with my life. The judge studied me for a long moment. Then she nodded, something like approval in her expression. Very well. Mr. Walsh, you'll prepare the settlement documents with those terms. Ms. Chen, you'll review and approve. I want this finalized within 1 week. She turned to Marcus. Mr. Brennan, you should count yourself extraordinarily fortunate that your ex-wife is more gracious than you deserve. This court finds your conduct reprehensible, and while I'm bound by Ms. Brennan's decision not to refer this matter for criminal prosecution, I want it on record that your behavior constituted fraud and perjury. You're fortunate the victim has chosen mercy. Marcus stood, his voice shaky. Your Honor, I want to apologize. To my ex-wife, to this court. I was wrong. I was incredibly wrong. Save it for your therapist, Judge Morrison said curtly. This hearing is adjourned. I expect final settlement documents by Friday. The gavel came down with a sharp crack. Outside the courthouse, the rain had stopped, leaving the city washed clean and bright. Patricia and I stood on the steps, watching people stream past, lawyers, defendants, families navigating their own legal dramas. You did good in there, Patricia said. Not many people would walk away from criminal prosecution. Most would want blood. I wanted justice, I replied, not vengeance. There's a difference. My phone buzzed. A text from Jessica. How did it go? Victory, I typed back. Details at lunch. Patricia was watching me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Can I ask you something? Why didn't you push for criminal charges? You had him dead to rights. I considered the question carefully. Because 3 years ago, I was focused on survival. Then I was focused on justice. But somewhere along the way, I realized I was actually focused on proving my worth. To him, to the court, to everyone who thought I was washed up. I paused. But I don't need to prove anything anymore. I know who I am, and I don't need Marcus to suffer for me to be whole. Patricia smiled. You're a better person than I am. I'd have pushed for jail time. Maybe, I said. But I'd rather take my $4.2 million and build something amazing than spend the next year in courtrooms watching Marcus appeal and delay and fight. I checked my watch. Besides, the best revenge isn't watching him fall. It's him watching me rise. We parted ways, Patricia heading back to her office, me walking toward the parking garage. My Tesla waited in its spot, paid for with my own money, earned through careful investments and hard work. In 6 months, I'd be closing on a small house in a quiet neighborhood. Nothing extravagant, but mine. The drive home took 40 minutes, giving me time to process everything. The hearing, the settlement, Marcus's tears, 3 years of planning, culminating in a 20-minute courtroom exchange and a check that would arrive in 30 days. It felt anticlimactic. But also, right. At home, I changed into comfortable clothes and made tea. My laptop sat on the small dining table, and I opened it out of habit, checking email. There, among the usual spam and notifications, was a message from an unfamiliar address. Subject, thank you. I opened it cautiously. Ms. Brennan, you don't know me, but my name is Rachel Mendoza. I'm the real estate agent who managed the Riverside Drive property for your ex-husband. I want you to know that the monthly payments you saw in the bank records were legitimate business expenses. I was never anything more than his agent, but I also want you to know that I've been watching the news about the case. What you did, documenting everything, waiting for the right moment, standing up in court, it inspired me. I'm in the process of leaving my own bad marriage. Your courage gave me courage. Thank you for showing me that washed-up women can rise again. With admiration, Rachel. I read the email twice, feeling something warm settle in my chest. That was the thing about standing up, about refusing to stay down. You never knew who was watching, who needed to see that survival was possible. I typed a brief response. Rachel, your message made my day. You're stronger than you know. If you ever need resources or just someone to talk to, please reach out. We washed-up women have to stick together. Natalie. The afternoon passed, quietly. I called Jessica and we made plans for celebratory dinner. I called my mother and told her the news. She cried, proud and relieved. I watered my small collection of plants, straightened my apartment, and let myself feel what I'd been holding back for 3 years. Peace. Around 5 p.m., my phone rang. Eleanor. I heard about the settlement, she said without preamble. Marcus called me from the courthouse. He's not doing well, Natalie. I'm sorry, I said, and meant it. I didn't want to destroy him. Just get what was mine. I know. Eleanor's voice was soft. And you were merciful, letting him avoid criminal charges. More merciful than I would have been if someone had done that to my child. She paused. He's agreed to go to therapy. Real therapy, not just anger management for show. He knows he needs help. That's good, I said. I hope it helps him become a better person. Natalie, can I ask you something? What are you going to do now? With the money? With your life? I looked around my small apartment, the second-hand furniture, the IKEA bookshelf, the single piece of original art I'd splurged on last year. It wasn't much, but it was mine, built with my own hands, earned through my own effort. I'm going to keep doing what I've been doing, I said, living my life, building my future. Maybe take a vacation. I've always wanted to see Greece, buy a house, Start a scholarship fund for women rebuilding after divorce. I smiled. Basically, everything Marcus said I couldn't do. Eleanor laughed, the sound slightly watery. You're going to be just fine, aren't you? Yes, I said, surprised by how much I meant it. I really am. After we hung up, I sat on my small balcony and watched the sun set over the city. Somewhere out there, Marcus was dealing with the consequences of his choices. Somewhere out there, Veronica was rebuilding her life too, hopefully wiser about red flags. Somewhere out there, Rachel Mendoza was finding her courage. And here I was, 3 years after the worst moment of my life, sitting in my small apartment that smelled like tea and possibility. My phone buzzed one more time. A text from an unknown number. I'm sorry. For everything. You deserved better. M. Marcus. Apologizing via text after all this time. I stared at the message for a long moment, then deleted it without responding. Some apologies came too late, and some conversations didn't need to happen. He'd served his purpose in my life, teaching me exactly how strong I could be when pushed to my limit. I didn't need his apology. I didn't need his acknowledgement. I didn't need anything from him at all. That was the final victory, I realized. Not the money, not the court ruling, not even the public exposure of his lies. The victory was sitting here in my small apartment, feeling absolutely nothing when I read his apology. No anger, no satisfaction, no lingering pain, just indifference. 3 years ago, Marcus had called me washed up at his engagement party, probably thinking I'd slink away in humiliation. Instead, I'd handed his fiancée evidence of his fraud and set in motion the collapse of his carefully constructed lies. But the real revenge, the kind that mattered, wasn't in his downfall. It was in my rise, in proving every single day that I was exactly as strong, capable, and valuable as I'd always been, that his assessment of me had been projection, not truth. The sunset painted the sky in shades of golden pink, the kind of beauty that made you believe in new beginnings. I raised my teacup in a silent toast to survival, to justice, to women who refuse to stay down, to phoenixes who rise from the ashes and burn brighter than anyone expected. Somewhere in the city, Marcus was learning that washed-up women don't wash away. We adapt. We document. We wait. And when the moment is right, we rise with enough force to reshape the landscape. I'd spent 3 years being invisible, building evidence, waiting for my moment. Now I was done waiting. The settlement would arrive in 30 days. My new life was already beginning. And Marcus? He'd spend the rest of his life knowing that the woman he tried to erase had been strong enough to expose him, gracious enough to spare him criminal prosecution, and powerful enough to walk away without looking back. That was the final lesson. The opposite of love isn't hate, it's indifference, and I'd finally achieved it. I finished my tea as the last rays of sunlight faded, ready for whatever came next. The future stretched out before me, full of possibilities Marcus had once tried to steal. But he'd failed. I was still here, still standing, still rising, and I'd never felt more alive. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.